District Board of Managers meeting for March 24th, 2016. Our first order of business is to swear in Mr. Bill Becker and Mr. Brian Shackleton, who have been appointed and reappointed as managers of this board, and for that we'll turn to Mr. Smith.
Very good. Mr. Shackleton, Mr. Becker, if you would stand and raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, William Becker, Brian Shackleton,
I, William Becker,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the constitutions of the United States
that I will support the constitutions of the United States
and of the state of Minnesota,
and of the state of Minnesota,
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and will faithfully discharge the duties
of the office of manager
of the office of manager
of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District
of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District
to the best of my judgment and ability.
to the best of my judgment and ability.
Very good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board on a matter that is not on the agenda or that is on the consent agenda? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Under information items and correspondence, you will see that we have the LCCMR grant request follow-up memorandum, and we have a memorandum also from staff for the whiskey system implementation update. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Shackleton?
I'd like to pull items 7.2, 7.3 through 7.6.
Okay, with that change, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? President's report, we had an executive committee meeting prior to this meeting to review the audit report with Mr. Gibbs, and that will be on the agenda tonight. I don't think there was any discussion there that was not going to be covered, but we just went through the schedules with him and the statements with him, and had an understanding of the report, of the audit report. And I would note that there are a number of meetings, I think it's spring, district-sponsored or hosted events coming up, and it would be wonderful if managers could attend some of those events as they roll out, just to let staff know or sign up. Some are on the agenda. There may be more that have been noticed in emails or in Splash, so just attend to that. And Policy and Planning Committee report, Manager Miller.
Present were myself, Manager Becker, Manager Olson, Manager White, and Manager Shackleton. And we have the minutes. Have the minutes been distributed?
Yes.
Okay. On the only action item is we recommended the something that's going to be on the agenda tonight. The consultant for 6 Mile Creek planning assistance. Is that right, James?
Correct.
Okay. And the rest of it's in the minutes.
All right, thank you. Questions?
I think it should be noted that we're going to take a different direction on actions that we're going to recommend actions to the board. Obviously they have to be acted upon by the board before they become effective, but rather than just let it hang, we'll take an affirmative or negative recommendation.
And the committee elected you, Manager Miller, as chair.
Well, I think they asked, the other member of the committee asked me to chair the committee, but I think you make the appointment.
Then, you know what, still need to talk with Manager Becker about committees, so I'll come back at the next meeting and,
Okay.
and ratify that.
Okay.
Make that a motion. The upcoming meeting and event schedule is in the agenda, going out through April. And we'll move into the item 9.1, which is the 2015 Six Mile Creek Carp Assessment Annual Report. Mr. Fieldseth, Ms. Brown, and Ms. Cook.
Thank you, President White and managers. While Justine gets settled, I'd like to just provide a brief introduction before her presentation. As you all know, we're in the process of developing our plan for the 6 Mile Subwatershed. We'll be kicking off that work with our first meeting in April. And the foundation of that plan is this strong scientific and technical understanding that the Watershed District brings to the table. In 2013, the district completed a comprehensive diagnostic of the 6 Mile Subwatershed that looked at internal and landscape loading of phosphorus, looked at some interactions with aquatic vegetation, both invasive and native, and then also looked at the role that carp were playing in the subwatershed. And we found that carp were really driving water quality out here. So given that following the completion of that diagnostic, we executed a contract with the University of Minnesota, and the objectives there were to estimate the abundance of carp in the system, to provide information on the seasonal distribution and movements of carp, and then also to identify the sources of juvenile carp in the subwatershed. So that contract has been managed by the AIS department with Eric Fieldseth leading that. And since I came on board and began working on the 6 Mile Subwatershed, he's been keeping me in tune with what's going on. And I just wanted to note that the recommendations that come out of this 3-year carp study are going to be a really major part of the 6 Mile Subwatershed implementation plan. So the recommendations that Justine and Reed will discuss this evening are going to be incorporated ultimately into that subwatershed implementation plan. So with that, I will turn it over.
All right, thank
Good to
you,
see
Anna.
Again, thanks for coming back.
You too, thank you. So first I'll start off by introducing myself. I know we have a couple new faces. So my name is Justine Cook, and I am the project manager. And with me here today, I have Reed Swanson, who's the master's student on the project, and also Dr. Peter Sorensen, the principal investigator. And like Anna said, I'll be going through the year 2 update on the common carp assessment in the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. So since we do have at least one new board member, I'd like to start off with a brief introduction on the common carp. And I think this video does a really good job showing just how disruptive the carp can be to our water quality. So if you see this video, you see the common carp, they feed on the bottom, and they take up mouthfuls of sediment, and then they can trap tiny food particles, and then they flush everything else out through their gills, like this. So you can imagine multiplying this scene across the bottom of your lake, just how disruptive these carp can be. They uproot submersed, rooted aquatic vegetation. They directly increase turbidity, and along with that, they can increase nutrient loading. So this leads to a damaging feedback cycle where you end up with fewer and fewer rooted plants, increased turbidity, and increased nutrients, and more algae instead of plants. So with that being said, for multiple reasons, carp have been the subject of control efforts in Minnesota and elsewhere around the world for almost a century now. But traditional methods to control carp rely heavily on commercial harvest, just essentially mass harvesting the adult carp. But this has not been very successful or sustainable for the long term. So for those reasons, the University of Minnesota, specifically Peter's lab, we've been looking at better ways to control carp. And we advocate for this approach called integrated pest management, which essentially has 3 tenets. The first being you target specific weaknesses in the life history and the biology of the carp. You use multiple existing tools or create new innovative tools. And lastly, you apply these tools in a way that's sustainable over the long term. So just some examples here. One behavior we can exploit in management is that adult carp form these large aggregations under the ice. So we can use tools like radio tags and radio telemetry to better locate these carp, to partner with commercial fishermen, and to increase the efficiency of harvest. Another example is targeting the carp eggs and larvae. So it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but all these little specks here on this plate, those are what carp eggs look like. They're tiny and they're incredibly vulnerable to predation. In Minnesota, we have a lot of fish that predate on eggs and larvae, particularly the bluegill sunfish. And they're so efficient at eating carp eggs that in places where you have healthy bluegill sunfish populations, we don't see any surviving young carp. So that's a positive. So we can use tools such as winter aeration in shallow places to really increase the survival and enhance the robustness of our native fish communities like bluegill, so they can be a natural control of the carp egg. Or in some instances, you can partner with the DNR and stock bluegills in ponds that don't already have those. But the big question is, how do we do this in a way that's sustainable over the long term? And when we have a place like the 6 Mile Creek Subwatershed, where you have dozens of interconnected ponds and lakes, and varying levels of connectivity, it's really a challenge. And you have to figure out, where are there carp, where aren't they, how are they moving, where are they spawning, and piece together all this information to figure out how to control them. And that's where this project comes in between the University of Minnesota and the Watershed District. As Anna mentioned, there's really 3 main deliverables of this project, looking at carp abundance, the carp movement patterns, and the recruitment patterns, or the juvenile carp. And our timeline, we started in 2014, and we're continuing 1 more year into 2017. So this is the 2-year findings to date. And I'll be talking about the first 2 deliverables, abundance and movement, and then I'm going to turn it over to Reed to talk about juvenile carp. So with that, estimates of carp abundance. How we do this is we conduct standardized boat electrofishing surveys. We set out to do this in as many lakes as possible, and we were able to do it in 15 of the study lakes. So we go out on the lake and we do a whole lake survey with the boat electrofisher, and we keep track of catch rates. How many carp are we catching per hour? And then we relate this to carp abundance through mathematical relationships, and then we relate this to carp biomass, because every carp we catch we measure, so we have an idea of the average size and weight of carp in all the different lakes. So carp biomass is essentially the total weight of carp per area. So this is a useful metric that you can compare between lakes. And I just wanted to show this video here. So this is a GoPro video taken during one of our electrofishing surveys from our field technician, Kyle Vang. So this is out on Parley Lake. This is what a carp electrofishing survey looks like. Parley Lake is one of the lakes with the highest carp density, and you can see some of those damaging impacts. You notice a complete absence of submerged aquatic vegetation, very poor clarity. You can see the green color, the algal dominance, and you can see lots and lots of carp. It's almost constant in a lake like this. So that's what an electrofishing survey looks like. That's just in one of the lakes. So we've done this on average about 6 times in the 15 different lakes. So we have a lot of data. As you can see from this table, I won't get into the details, but this is in the annual report if you want to look at the numbers. But for now, I'll just touch on kind of this last result, the total biomass. And this is what it looks like in graphical form, a little bit easier to see. So I wanted to point out that those negative impacts of carp, the loss of vegetation and all the cascading impacts, they really start to occur at about 100 kilograms per hectare of carp in shallow Midwestern systems. And how that corresponds to the map is that threshold of 100 kilograms per hectare, that's shown in green. So we have a few lakes that are below that threshold, Pearsons, Kelsers, and Stone Lake, and everything else exceeds that threshold. And some of these lakes, those in the red, and up here, Halstead's Bay in the dark red, those are 5 to even 10 times the amount of carp that these lakes can support without damage. So we have incredible numbers of carp in the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. One more thing I wanted to point out is you can see Pearsons Lake down here in the green. So they're below the damaging threshold there, but that's not how they were 10 years ago. As you may know, the Pearsons Lake Association has been very active in carp management, and they have removed almost 6,000 adult carp from Pearsons Lake. So without that removal, Pearsons Lake would have actually been in the orange color. So that's an example of successful removal, and you really can get these lakes below that threshold. So that about is the summary for abundance. So I'll move on to common carp movement and distribution. So our methods for studying carp movement is a mass radio tagging study. We have implanted 120 carp with radio tags in 13 lakes across the subwatershed, and we find each of these carp every month, and we map their locations. This is a picture of what a radio tag carp looks like. You can see it's about an 8-inch metal antenna sticking out of its body cavity. This is in Zumbro Lake, one of them that we released. And then this map on the right, that's just an example of what a monthly map looks like. This happens to be August of 2015, and every one of these colored dots is one of the individual 120 fish. So I know that's a lot of information on that slide, so I've chosen a couple examples to zoom in on. So starting on the left, this is Parley and Mud Lake down in the lower end of the subwatershed. All of the pink dots are carp we implanted up in Mud Lake, and all of the yellow dots are carp we implanted in Parley Lake. And we implanted these in October of 2014, so this is in November of 2014. It's 1 month after we implanted them, and you can see all of the colors are mixed. And clearly, these two lakes support one population of carp. It would make no sense to manage them individually. You have to manage them together. Interestingly, if you fast forward a couple months to January 2015, every single one of these tagged carp came together under the ice and formed a massive aggregation. And the same thing happened this past January in the same exact spot in Parley Lake. So that's, a key piece of information that you could use from a management perspective. They're very vulnerable, right there in that spot in the winter. If you zoom out a little bit, now we're including Halstead's Bay of Lake Minnetonka too. And these blue dots are carp that were tagged in Halstead's Bay. And again, we're fast forwarding a few more months, and now we're into June, which is actually peak spawning season for these carp. And you can see there's lots of mixing going on between all three of these lakes. So some of these blue dots are in the creek, some made it all the way up to Mud, even down into Parley right here, and vice versa. Some of these carp from Parley and Mud have made their way into the creek, and then later in subsequent months they made their way down to Lake Minnetonka as well. So for a summary, actually 87% of the carp tagged in these three lakes have moved between lakes, so almost all of them. So looking at a summary of our movement data at a watershed scale, here's a map that shows the percent of our radio tagged carp moving between lakes as designated by the arrows. So again, in the lower reaches, we have a lot of movement. It's worth pointing out too that the carp, they don't stop at the border of the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. Almost a quarter of our tagged carp down here have ventured into greater Lake Minnetonka, other bays, and some have come back and some haven't yet. And then above the Parley Lake Dam, we have substantial movement in the mid portion of the system. So these are lakes Auburn and Lunston Lake. And then in the rest of the lakes, we also have tags, but there hasn't been any movement in and out, except we had one radio tagged fish. So 1 out of 15, 7% of our Wasserman fish moved down to Auburn Lake and back again. So that's kind of covers the between lake movement portion, but we can also look within a lake and look at the seasonal differences and how carp are moving. So to show this, I just picked Wasserman Lake as one example, but we have this data for every single individual lake. So what you're seeing here is a full year of tracking, once a month from November of 2014 through October of 2015. So starting in the fall, the carp were spread out around the lake. And then in December, they start to form this winter aggregation. January and February, they stay tightly aggregated. By March, they start to break up. And then in April, they're fully broken up out of that aggregation. Then if you look into May and June and July, this is during the spawning season of carp, you can see they're all in this shallow part of Wasserman Lake. And this is a very densely vegetated part, and it's prime spawning habitat for the carp. And then after the spawning season, they spread out again, and throughout summer and fall, when the water is warm, they're spread around the lake feeding. So obviously it's now March again, so we have a few more months of data, so I can show you what that looks like here. And this allows us to compare, month to month between years. So, this is November, December, and so on. And you can see some of the same patterns for the 2015 season. The carp are spread out. They start to aggregate, and they remain aggregated through February, and then they're starting to break up right now in March. But interestingly, the carp did a little bit something different this year. So last year, they aggregated in this south corner the entire winter. and this year they aggregated in the north end. So obviously that has important implications from a management perspective of where you might target them and remove them in commercial seining, and some places in the lake are better suited for commercial fishing than others. So I guess that concludes the movement in abundance, and I'll turn it over to Reed now for talk about juvenile carp.
All right, thanks, Justine. Like she said, I'll be talking about how we're identifying sources of juvenile carp across the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. In order to do this, we're doing 2 things. First, conducting annual fall trap net surveys in August, and to date we've sampled 24 lakes and ponds across the subwatershed. And on the bottom you can see a picture of what a typical trap net looks like in South Lunston Lake. And then we're also conducting 2 aging studies encompassing 8 different lakes across the subwatershed, in which we can look at historical patterns of recruitment, before the study started. So for the first results from the trap netting data, we have found no evidence of juvenile carp in 15 of the 24 sites across the subwatershed. However, we have sampled juvenile carp at 9 of the sites. In 2014, there were 5 locations in which we found juvenile carp. The numbers next to the locations represent the number of young of the year fish that we caught per net, per trap net. And these numbers are relatively low, especially in comparison to 2015, where we found young of the year carp in 6 locations, notably in 2 new locations, and then even more notably in extremely high numbers in both South Lunston Lake and Crown College Pond, where we're catching around 300 young of the year fish per net, in comparison to the high numbers of about 20 per net in the year before. And this demonstrates, how variable carp reproduction and recruitment can be from year to year. In some years they're not very successful, in other years they can be more successful. These results complement our aging study. So to date we've aged 311 carp from throughout the subwatershed. The ages of these fish range from 2 to 54 years old, but most of them come from only a few strong year classes. So on this graph, on the x-axis, what you're looking at is the year in which the fish were spawned, and then the y-axis is the number of fish that were spawned in that year from our sample. And notably, these 4 year classes, 2001, 2002, 1990, 91, and 92, account for 64% of the recruitment across the whole subwatershed, which is a good sign. It means, there's not consistent recruitment every year in this system.
Can I ask a silly question? Would you count 1960 and 1962 as strong years, or 61 and 62 as strong years, since there's an actual representative sample from them? Or a representation? Yeah, I know.
Not necessarily. These are kind of the old fish, and kind of shows you, almost like the survival period for carp in this watershed. We haven't been able to find any older than 54 years old, which kind of shows how long-lived they are, and which contributes to how difficult they are to control.
Sure. Thank you.
And you can take this a step further and look at individual lakes or potential management units. And so what we found is that the age structures actually differ between different lakes in the watershed. And notably, the recent recruitment has only been observed in Auburn and Lunston lakes, kind of down here in the center. And this makes sense when you go back to our trap netting data, and South Lunston Lake, was one of our highest catch rates for young of the year carp. And our radio telemetry data shows that fish move readily between these 2 basins. So it makes sense that, there's younger carp being produced in this area, and it shows up historically in our aging data as well. So they complement each other quite well. Which kind of begs the question is, what was happening in those years to make the carp so successful? So in order to look at this, we kind of looked at some historical data, and we were able to find a hydrograph from Parley Lake from 1980s to the present. And as you can notice here, in these years, 1989, 90, and 91, was kind of like the perfect storm for carp recruitment. So you had a series of years right here where you had extremely low water levels, lower than any other years you're seeing on the graph, which would likely reduce the amount of native fish that can predate on the carp eggs in those years, followed by a very wet year and high water levels, which would facilitate the movement of adult carp into these adjacent ponds and wetlands and allow them to reproduce successfully, resulting in those large age classes that we saw on the graphs. So after going through these 3 deliverables of the project so far, we can kind of make a few key findings and management implications. First of all, there's multiple subpopulations are evident in the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed, suggesting that these should be managed separately as multiple management units. carp abundance and biomass varies by location, and there's some areas like Pearson's Lake, Kelzer's Lake, and Stone Lake that require little to no removal, while other areas require significant amounts of adult removal to get below that threshold of 100 kilograms per hectare. We also found winter aggregations formed in most lakes, suggesting that adult removal via winter seining may be feasible depending on the location in which these aggregations form on a given year. We also found that spawning season migration corridors also do exist, most notably between the 6 Mile Marsh corridor between Halstead Lake and Mud Lake, suggesting that adult removal via trapping at these choke points might be a viable option in this system. And finally, that recruitment was restricted to just a few locations in a few year classes, suggesting that suppression of this recruitment may be possible in this system. So where do we take these implications next? Well, it kind of depends on the watershed and what the goals are, and specific achievable objectives they want to pursue. For example, one objective could be to kind of start at the headwater region, Pearson's Lake and Wasserman Lake, and move down the chain. Another possible scenario might be that you want to work your way up from Halstead Bay southward. And in doing this, you might want to install some sort of bidirectional carp trap between Marsh Lake and Halstead's Bay. But whichever strategy you choose to pursue, we first recommend that you concentrate on suppressing recruitment. This can be done through aerating of carp nurseries or blocking the access of adult fish to these nursery areas. And after you have recruitment under control, then you can go about removing the adults. So this winter we'll actually conduct a pilot winter seining program and assess the feasibility of adult removal in 1 or 2 lakes within the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. Other possible solutions would be barriers or traps, and drawdowns and poisonings in areas where that could work. So as we move into our 3rd year of the study, we want to assess more of the annual variation. So we only have 3 years, so it's kind of limited in the scope of that. But as we've seen, we have wet years, dry years, and normal years, if you will. And these relate a lot to the dynamics of the carp population. So we'll have one more field season to kind of get at this variability. And then also, as part of my master's thesis, I want to look at quantifying the carp nursery contribution in the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. And we've started to do some of this work using microsatellite genetic markers to look at this genetic structure of the population within 6 Mile Creek. And then also, the otoliths that we use to age the fish have an elemental signature based on the water in which the fish lived in. And we can use some statistical methods to determine the natal origin, hopefully, of these fish using that technique. So we'll stay tuned for that, I guess. And with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions you guys might have.
I'm just wondering, because I know that many of the creeks and ditches in the subwatershed may not necessarily produce any flow enough to allow the movement back and forth. So how do you take account for that in the study for the movement?
So I guess that was the hope of the length of the study. So the 3 years, we were hoping we could account for the different seasonal variability you would see. So actually the very first year we started on this, 2014, was a really wet year, and unfortunately we didn't have our radio tags in yet to document the movement of fish, but anecdotally we saw a lot of fish moving through a lot of those stream corridors just by observing when we first got out here and started this. Kind of conversely, last year it was very dry, and a lot of these streams didn't have any water or enough water for fish to pass through, and so we weren't able to, see that movement. We're hoping this year we have a wet spring, and so we can document, kind of the maximum potential of fish to move in the subwatershed. But there are definitely different streams, for example, like Crown College Pond, where this year we saw adult fish reach it. They successfully reproduced. We've caught a lot of young in the year. But we don't know if those fish can actually get down back to the lake as the stream dries out. And so hopefully some of the nursery work that we're doing as part of my thesis will shed some light on that.
I guess specifically I want to know if we are able to document in the report when a area is dry, so that we know that you say that there's no movement, but we know that there's no movement because there's no place for them, no corridor for them to use.
Right.
I mean, are we tracking that the ditch is dry this year?
Right. I guess I don't know, I don't want to speak from the water sampling people, but I know I've seen the Minnehaha staff out, I think it's every 2 weeks, taking stream gauge readings. I don't know, Eric?
Mr. Fieldset, thank you.
Thank you, managers. Yeah, I mean, through a lot of our stream monitoring with our water quality staff, and we're collecting a lot of that data on flow and a lot of those reaches. So we do have that data we can go back to and compare it to when we were collecting the carp data.
Thank
You
you.
know, another thing I might add is these movements are far from random. I mean, we know from other locations that these fish know where they are and they're following specific pathways that they understand, believe it or not. So we don't actually have to always measure them, you know, just sort of seeing where they're headed half the time can be really helpful. And that's actually a real great way to start target removal processes, if you understand what I mean, because the movements are fairly predictable once you start to figure it out. What it seems like they're doing is going back home where they actually were spawned from, like salmon. It's pretty remarkable.
Thank you, Dr. Sorensen. Other questions? Mr. Becker, Manager Becker?
You mentioned that one of the factors that affected recruitment was the health of the predator population, but I didn't see any follow-up in your research on the health of the various predator populations in the lakes you were looking at. Is that something you've done and chose not to report on, or is it something we should be looking at in the future?
Yes, that's a great question. I guess past work in the Sorensen lab, starting in 2006, we've done a lot of work on bluegill predation on carp eggs, a lot of laboratory and field controlled experiments. So we do have, you know, we can quantify how many eggs bluegills can eat and that they're actually controlling the carp eggs. As for the health of the native fish communities in these lakes, our TrapNet surveys for Young of the Year carp in August, we do also catch native fish, and we do have that data and keep track of bluegill sunfish catch rates, so we know where they are and where they aren't, and if they have a winter kill year and die. So I guess, yes, indirectly, we are tracking the bluegill sunfish population as well.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
And the populations are healthy based on what you see?
Yes, especially during these couple of years, they have been. But I guess if you look back at the hydrograph here. So in 1988 and 1989, so this water level is actually 2.5 feet below average. So in some places like Mud Lake and Marsh Lake, they would only be a foot deep or essentially dry, and they would freeze solid. So there's no way that bluegill sunfish could survive there. But during the past few years where we've been studying, we've had normal water levels, and we've had record catch rates of bluegill sunfish in some of these places like Marsh Lake.
With the exception of South Lunston Lake and Crown College Pond, have relatively low bluegill abundance in comparison to some of the other potential nursery habitat areas. So a small pond that may, seem like it could be a good nursery area, like Marsh Lake over the past few years has had more bluegills than most of the other areas we've sampled. But there's also been no recruitment in Marsh Lake, which we hypothesized was a productive carp nursery. But in South Lunston Lake and Crown College Pond, next to zero bluegill sunfish. And that data should be reported in the annual report as well.
Yeah, managers, if I may. So one of the more interesting things, through all this that we're finding is there's not frequent, periods of new introduction of young carp. There really is these, in most systems in a way, these few big events that have happened in the past on these really low water years where there's been fish kills basically that damage those bluegill populations. In years after that, we haven't had those cases in these suspected nurseries, so the bluegills repopulate it and provide that, some level of control. So, I think, that's provides a lot of management opportunities. It's preventing those few situations that do occur in some of those water bodies.
Other questions? Thank you. Manager Blixt?
So the bluegill question makes me think back about Lake Nokomis. For some reason, I thought that we were trying to control the bluegills in Nokomis because they have the same eating patterns for the bottom of the lake as carp. Am I thinking of a different fish?
Manager Blix, managers. You know, I don't know all the exact details of the Nokomis biomanipulation. Kelly Dooley would have more information on that. But I think one of the bigger goals in that was actually targeting bullheads and bullhead removal,
Okay.
and then stocking walleye to predate.
I know that we were stocking with walleye, but I thought it was to target bullheads, not
I believe so.
bluegills?
That
Certainly.
matches my memory too.
I thought
You
it
said-
was too.
My recollection.
Okay, we all think it was bluegills.
My recollection is that it was bullhead, but also the bluegills, that there was a population threshold where at a certain threshold they would eat suspended plankton, but once the numbers superseded that, they would start to go. In addition to eating plankton, like suspended plankton, would start sucking up dirt or
Yeah.
ground, just like carp.
Carp.
But the idea was to bring the bluegill population down to the threshold or past it, in addition to dealing with bullheads.
That might be.
So, we don't know.
And I think
We need to coordinate our studies
I think they
here.
were doing it with walleye too.
So, you have made some preliminary, you've given us some preliminary thoughts about how we might deal with this, but another year of data collection coming up. Are there other questions? Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I think
Thank you,
this is
managers.
more than I expected.
It's marvelous.
There's a lot of information, and it's going to be very helpful for the plan. Great work.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, managers.
Yeah, thank you, managers.
Mr. Fieldset, AIS updates.
Thank you, managers. So in addition to the carp study that we got going on and the watercraft inspection cost shared roaming spectrum program, which is on the agenda tonight as well, I had several other updates I wanted to provide to the board. The first was I wanted to provide more information on a new invasive star stonewort. This is actually, is new in Minnesota. It was first found last fall in Lake Coronis, and I have it circled. It's about 90 miles northwest of where we are. So this was the first case of finding this invasive in Minnesota. And I did a little bit of looking at the 2015 watercraft inspection data, kind of looking at use from Lake Coronis to the district lakes, and identified several lakes in the district that people have visited from Coronis. So there's definitely a real threat of having star stonewort enter our district through watercraft. So it's actually very widespread in Michigan. It was found in the late 90s, but what I've learned is actually wasn't identified as star stonewort until 2006. It kind of looked like a native. It's the larger native that we already have. And it's recently, a couple years ago, it was found in Wisconsin. So right now in Wisconsin, there's 5 lakes infested with it, all in the eastern end of Wisconsin. The plant's really not understood that well. It's very under-researched, especially compared to other invasives like Eurasian water milfoil. So I recently attended a conference in Michigan that held a special session on star stonewort to learn more about the plant from people who are actually have dealt with it for a number of years, learn what they're doing and how it's affected their water bodies. So I was going to share some of that with you today. So star stonewort, it's actually an algae. It's a macroalgae. So there's a picture of it. It actually looks like any other aquatic plant in the lake. And we do have some native macroalgae as well. It's definitely, if you look at it, just looking at a lake, it can look like any other plant. But the best way to identify it, it has these little, where it gets its name, these little star-shaped bulbils. They're really very tiny from what I understand. You can see from that one picture in the hand. And these are usually in the sediment. And that's the best way to identify the plant. But some of the issues we should really be concerned about this plant, I'm learning from people in Michigan and Wisconsin, it provides a lot of ecological damage to a lake. It impacts the biodiversity of aquatic plants. Interestingly enough, it can be present in the lake for years, and you might not even see it. It just looks like another plant, acts like another plant, doesn't dominate anything. But then for some reason, it just rapidly blooms and takes off, and it takes over the whole lake. It will outcompete virtually all other aquatic plants, with the exception of a couple plants that seem to do well with it. And it'll easily outcompete Eurasia water milfoil. They've shown in Michigan through a lot of different plant surveys, lakes that have been dominated by Eurasia water milfoil, they get starry stonewort, milfoil's gone, and it's all starry stonewort. They've seen issues with water quality from the plant. So as fast as the population can increase, it actually can rapidly crash. And when it crashes, it has some toxins in its cell that actually will release, and it actually kill all the other aquatic plants with it. So you end up with, a lake with no vegetation. So then, you're going to end up with, harmful blue-green algae blooms. I'm not sure if these lakes, how fast they were ever recovered, things like that. But this was something they discussed that has happened, and it will happen once you have starry stonewort. Another interesting thing, the plants are so dense, they actually end up creating their own little thermocline where they exist, and it can actually create low oxygen underneath that the big dense of plants. And then this plant doesn't root like other plants, but it has the ability to draw phosphorus from the sediment. I'm certainly not an expert in all that, but that's something they did discuss. So it can actually draw phosphorus up into the sediment, into the water column. It has shown an impact on spawning habitat for fish. They've actually have gone out and they would clear areas of starry stonewort and actually try to create new beds and to draw fish back in to spawn. And then it's very difficult to detect early, from what I understand. You'll find it just mixed in with other native macroalgae plants, so it's you don't see it until it's very widespread and too late, frankly. And it's difficult to manage too. There's definitely been some specific management techniques that they've had to do different than other aquatic plants, and a lot of this has to do with it being an algae. So when you treat algae with a pesticide, you have to actually make contact with every part of the plant to kill it, because it has individual cells that each kind of operate on their own. Whereas a vascular aquatic plant, you can make contact with part of it, and it'll kind of translocate the herbicide through. So that makes it difficult, and then actually getting the herbicide to all areas of the plant can be difficult, because it's creating this little thermocline, and they've actually have had to almost chill some of the pesticides so it's denser than the water, so it sinks down to where the plant is, or they have to inject it on the bottom. So these are definitely not typical management strategies, something that's very specific to treating starry stonewort. Eradication does not seem feasible. From what I gather, most invasives, it's very tough regardless, but this seems very tough. But they have been able to provide some control on it, but it definitely takes a little bit of technique. And then, I've also seen this in the literature too, but zebra mussels are very attracted to the plant for some reason. I don't know why or what it would be, but they attach very readily and prefer starry stonewort to other plants. And through these bulbils, the plant is very rapidly spreading. I understand, fragments of the plants can desiccate fairly rapidly, die out of the water fairly rapidly. I don't know how fast, but the big unknown is these bulbils, how long they can actually last out of the water and be transported on, a watercraft or any other equipment. So that's a really big unknown, and frankly something that's concerning and not well understood. So some of what's being done in Minnesota, I thought I'd highlight. You know, not into all the details on what they're doing in Lake Coronas, but I know they're looking at some small treatments. It's pretty widespread out there. I think 300 some acres of the lake's infested with it so far. I'm sure based on what I'm learning that it's just going to take off more and more. The research center has been doing some research on looking at distribution and what kind of conditions it prefers to grow in. They found that the upper Midwest apparently is ideal for growth and spread. And I think their next step, from what I read, is they're identifying more specific areas of risk in Minnesota where it might do really well. And as a district staff, we're learning to identify the plants when we're out in the field. We'll be able to spot it quickly. We're going to kind of focus some of our early detection efforts looking at some of these native macroalgae beds where it's usually found, and then certainly trying to keep up with management and identify some steps we would have to take if we ever did find it, find the plants.
Manager Shackleton?
So I remember a similar presentation, 8-9 years ago, about this evil thing that may come and destroy the quality of our water and our watershed. We've kind of worked forward strategically in some ways, and everything that you've identified here is individually scary and together kind of daunting to look at. What kind of lessons have we learned? I mean, the last line says preparing for a possible rapid response if located in the district. What kind of lessons have we learned with zebra mussels so that we can kind of effectively coordinate with other agencies and not spin our wheels and kind of waste public dollars?
Yeah, Manager Shuck to the managers. I will say, I think one of the more interesting things too is, these aren't just things that could happen. They have happened in Michigan lakes, which to me, it's different than zebra mussels, where a lot of the prior research has been, Great Lakes, that's not really inland lakes. But I mean, certainly we've gone through a rapid response, that we learned a lot from, as far as containment, being able to detect it early, having that containment, having those partnerships, knowing who we need to partner with. And one of the big differences I'm seeing with kind of Lake Coronas and here, not being in all the details, but, they've been kind of, lacking a great plan on what to do back and forth. I think it's kind of in the DNR's court a little bit. They don't have any local units of government with expertise or the knowledge to do much. But yeah, I mean, I wish there was a great answer on you could just contain it and treat it and you take care of it. But the thing is, we learned from other invasives, it's a tough battle. If you find it localized enough, it's worth it to, contain it with barriers, quarantine, frankly, if you have to, if you feel it's not widespread, and try to control it. But those are, tough decisions beyond that, because these plants do, spread so fast and rapidly. But we can take all the things we've learned from Christmas Lake and apply it to any future rapid response. But it's challenging.
What kind of engagement has there been from the DNR? I mean, it sounds like in Coronas, the response has not been, certainly not nimble. And if they're lacking local partners that have depth of knowledge, I would be concerned about putting a lot of money into isolating part of a water body if we don't know that would actually work, or applying chemicals if we don't understand the basic science around the starry still north.
Yeah, Manager Shackleton. Like I said, I don't want to comment too much just because I'm not involved in all those planning details with the Coronas. My take, a couple of the DNR staff attended this conference as well. It was just in March. It was, so that's part of our process here is to try to learn more about the plant so we can effectively, to the best of our ability, learn what's worked for others, and try to apply it if it does happen here. I don't have all the answers right now. We're really still learning about this plant, but yeah, I mean, as far as Coronis goes, I think they are lacking some resources to try to do much, but it's also in 300 acres of the lake. What's really feasible at that point? Certainly you want to prevent the spread from that, so you could talk about things on how to do that, which, are certainly political in nature as well. There's a lot to it. Yep.
Manager Olson?
Do we know where it started, where it came from?
Yeah, I think the native range is kind of Western Europe, all the way to Japan, from what I understand. So it's kind of the Eurasia area. And from what I understand, it's not overly invasive there, but they also have very different climatic conditions. So for whatever reason, our climate is very suitable for it to do well in.
Manager Sheckler?
I guess I'd like to request that we have a general conversation about Starry Stonework relative to AIS, and I mean, I've expressed my concerns in the past about a deep hole that can never get filled with our resources. But I also have to acknowledge that there's a place for us to respond, and I don't know if that is to collect basic science around different species versus a response that's a different type of response. I mean, the presentation we had tonight about carp was fundamental science, which we can then apply in a tangible way. We know how to, in part because we understand them. I don't know. I don't have an understanding of how much we know about Starry Stonework. I don't know what exists out there, and I will be honest. The last bullet point of a possible rapid response, if located in the district, is concerning, because what will our response be if we don't understand the species and we don't know what to do? I mean, we're just throwing darts in the wall and see what sticks, and is that the appropriate way for us to invest resources? So I guess I'd like to request to have this come back at some future point at a workshop or board meeting, so we can have all 7 managers present to talk about what do we do.
Thank you. Mr. Erdahl.
Manager Sheckler, President White, and managers, I think it's important to realize that at some point we were at that same level of understanding with carp, and so at some point you have to start learning. And start trying to do things. And field research is different from laboratory research. You can do different things in a laboratory setting that might not work with applied field science. So I think it's great for all of you to kind of go into these types of opportunities as informed as possible. But as you heard from Eric and other staff too, this is a developing body of knowledge. So you can only learn so much, and then you have to kind of figure out how to make the kind of priority decisions that you have to make with the resources and the time and effort. So I don't think within a year that we won't be close to the level of understanding and knowledge about the life cycle of Starry Stonewort as we are with Asian carp, because it's just not going to proceed that quickly.
Manager Shackleton?
Thank
you.
Maybe carp will eat it.
I would agree with that, but as a policymaker who's charged with actually managing the money, I don't want to approve money without understanding how it will be used, what the possible implications are, or to have a good sense for what baseline knowledge there is out there. And at this point, everything I know about Starry Stormwater has been in this presentation. And I find it concerning that we're preparing a rapid response.
If I may. Manager Sheckler, I certainly didn't mean to construe that, we're preparing an actual rapid response plan, more that we're trying to gather information to the best of our ability. If we did get it, at least have some information on what we would do. But we certainly aren't preparing a formalized ABCD rapid response plan
Sure.
what we
And
do.
I appreciate that
Yeah.
this is really an opportunity to tell us, hey, guys, there's a problem coming up here, and we need to, we need to be able to respond. And I just would like to reinforce that we should continue to be partners in that response.
Other questions, Manager Blixt?
I'm just wondering, to Manager Shackleton's overall question, I have always thought that we are on our guard for any of the other boogie men that are out there, there's a long list of them. Rusty Crayfish, I mean, it just kind of goes on forever, and I'm assuming that this is just put in the awareness category like any of the other ones, that the staff is learning to identify them so that if they were to, come into any of our water bodies, we would then have a discussion about how we want to approach dealing with them, because everyone is going to be different. So I'm assuming that was my take on what Eric presented. So you can correct me if I'm wrong on that assumption, whereas Brian took it to mean like you're preparing the lifeboats or something.
Yeah, it's a correct assumption.
So my assumption is more correct, that you're just like any of the other
Not
ones
to
that
put
are
you
out
on the
there.
spot, Mr. Gibson.
Don't have to
Come on.
repeat it.
There's 6 of us that agree with Brian, but, you can go.
I'm
Managers,
just
we are-
saying, I just want to know if my assumption is
Eric agrees with
where
all
we're
of
at,
you.
That's right, I think you're all right.
or are you?
Good
are-
answer.
I think maybe in terms of, I think that you are, Manager Blix, I think you do have, the rapid response currently, because we don't know that much about the plant or the algae, is to, if it's identified, we have to bring people together immediately and then figure out what the action might be. It's not that the action is already defined. You gotta kind of have all hands on deck, work with our partners, see what resources might be available. If there's an opportunity to see if it can be isolated. Some of those things are lower cost, and then when you get into some of the treatment things, that gets to be higher cost, so.
But I would like to just,
Thank you, Mr. Sheckler.
sorry, to Pam's point, this presentation was not like the spiny water flea, which is a nuisance for fishermen, but doesn't kill off surrounding aquatic plants, doesn't push away
Right.
fish populations, and so.
Remind me, there is in the budget a rapid response envelope, correct?
Yes, managers, in our work plans, in our budget, we do have a kind of contingency fund of, I think it's about $30,000 for rapid response if we ever chose to use it again in a situation like that.
Thank you. All right, you have more.
I
for us.
do.
Go ahead.
I also want to provide an update on some applied research projects that are in development. These are in the memo I provided, but 2015 we had a grant from Hennepin County to start kind of do some exploratory research at hybrid milfoil. And our partners on this were the University of Minnesota and Montana State. Hybrid milfoil, the concept's not new. We know about it. It's been studied elsewhere. It's gaining more steam in the research field. And there's some expertise at Montana State University that we were able to tap into. But in Minnesota, it's really been lacking. The understanding of, we go out, all these treatments are occurring for Eurasian water milfoil. Some are effective, some are not. There's really not a whole lot of investigating why this isn't working, what's going on after we treat. So this is starting to look at some of that. So we had kind of 3 goals we set out to look at. First was just to understand what types of milfoil we have in Lake Minnetonka and Christmas Lake. Those are study sites. And those could be the invasive Eurasian, there's a native northern water milfoil, and then the hybrid between the two. So we need to know what we have first. And then are we finding different types in herbicide-treated bays versus not treated, untreated lakes? And then are these hybrid populations genetically different in different water bodies, or are they kind of more spread around? So this work really has some management implications, if you may. There could be certain genotypes of hybrids that are more resilient to herbicide management. There are maybe other ones that are more rapidly spreading, more aggressive. So these are some of the things that could come out of this work. I have this slide as just some of the key findings. Our full report's still being developed, and it should be done very soon. If you just look at the graph, my left here on top, there's just kind of 3 clusters of points. And that just kind of shows. So in the field, you can't really identify hybrid milfoil from Eurasian without some actual genetic work. That just shows how they do it, how they differentiate between Eurasian, hybrid, and northern. They fall in these different areas genetically. And then on the right is you can go further in depth in those genetics with hybrids and actually see, so basically we ended up finding 4 different strains of hybrids so far. The hybrid in Smith's Bay was different than the hybrid in Grays Bay, which was different than some of these other bays. And there's some in North Arm I know that was different from those. So there's just variation. They're not always, specific to bays or lakes. There's some that are related to each other, but there's definitely some that are totally unique. And our study sites were, Grays Bay, St. Albans, and North Arms. These have all been treated in the past, and were treated again by Lake Minnetonka Association. So we just came in before and after they treated and collected our data. And then we chose some bays and lakes that haven't been treated, so Smith's Bay and Veterans Bay, Lake Minnetonka. And then Christmas Lake, which we knew had a good abundance of northern water milfoil. So what we found is hybrids were definitely more abundant in lakes that were treated. And in those same lakes, we did not find any northern water milfoil. So essentially those treatments are, getting rid of northern water milfoil and selecting for more hybrids. At least that's what the early data would kind of show us. Because we did find plenty of northern water milfoil in those lakes that haven't been treated. And then, I quickly kind of just, in the treated bays, so Grays Bay, just, some interesting things. It's dominated by hybrid water milfoil. St. Albans actually had more Eurasian water milfoil with some hybrids. And then North Arm Bay was mostly hybrids as well. But then you get to the non-treated ones. Smith's Bay had a lot of northern water milfoil with some hybrids. Veterans Bay had a lot of Eurasian with some mix of northern hybrids. And then Christmas Lake was almost an even mix of Eurasian and northern, and they did find 1 hybrid plant in there. I just want to quickly show you some of the pre and post data we collected from the treatment. All those dots indicate places where there was milfoil, and then there's the post-treatment map, which was a few months after. So you can see that actually the treatment was actually very effective. In Grays Bay, the hybrid milfoil was actually pretty susceptible to herbicides. But note all the green dots on there. Those are plants that we collected that haven't been genetically analyzed yet. Through our initial grant from Hennepin County, it was really exploratory work to see if we see anything interesting that would prompt further research. So analyzing those would certainly give us a lot more information. Then quickly, just this was another bay. The treatment was very effective, and both of these, the plants that were left were hybrids. And then North Arm was the one that was kind of different. There was a lot more milfoil left over in that, a lot of hybrids left over. And one thing interesting is the hybrid strain in North Arm was actually different than Grays and St. Albans, which were treated. So it's possible that we found a strain that may be more resistant to herbicides, but it's equally as possible that the treatments in North Arm were just less effective. So they're both a couple theories, both equally as possible. So again, like I said, there were a lot of plants collected from there that haven't been analyzed yet. So Hennepin County awarded us with kind of a phase 2 of that work. Hennepin County, if you're not familiar, they get all the counties are appropriated money for AIS through the state legislature, and they open some of their funds up for grants through local partners. So we got a $20,000 grant from them basically to finish analyzing the rest of those samples. We are really kind of a pass-through. We're acted as a local partner to secure the grant funds, but Montana State will actually be analyzing all those samples. We'll help where we can with the report and any additional field collection. And then we also have some zoo muscle control studies, which this is actually identified in the 2016 AS work plan. And we'll be accomplishing that through kind of two activities. One is looking at, through another Hennepin County grant. They award us $24,000 to evaluate control of Belgers with very low doses of copper, of a copper-based pesticide. So what the literature shows is Belgers are 100, if not 1,000 times more. You can use 1,000 times less copper-based pesticide than you would need for adults to kill Belgers. They're just more fragile. So the goal of this is, in small lakes and even enclosed bays, it's a possible management strategy similar to carp, where you're taking advantage of the unique life cycle of the animal. You'd apply the same kind of theory to zebra mussels. Zebra mussel adults, they only live for 3 to 5 years, according to the literature. So if you can disrupt that recruitment, the Belger survival, or at least reduce it, those adults should reduce over time. So it may be a way to actually suppress adult population over long periods of time by using very low doses of a copper-based pesticide, which at that low dose should provide, the goal of minimal non-target impacts. It may be a way to reduce some ecological impact in smaller lakes. Another possibility with this study, it may be a way to kind of treat residual waters in boats that can't be drained. If it's a really low dose of copper, it may be safe to do that. This is, again, really exploratory research, and hopefully have some findings that the AS Research Center can run with. I forgot to mention that we, again, act as a local partners to secure these grant funds, and MACERC will really be leading that study and doing the work. And then finally, another zebra mussel control study looking at adult zebra mussel control. This would be a project that the USGS applied for funding to some grants from the AS Research Center for. We'd be kind of a local partner in this, but basically they'd be developing this water temperature-based treatment protocol, kind of a decision tool for future rapid responses. This is really building on our Christmas Lake experience. We tried 3 different products out there. We did the best we could with figuring out doses for all these, effective doses for all these products, but it's not as scientific as it could be. So this is really be publishable type data developed by the USGS in their lab, evaluating these 4 products and at what kind of concentrations is best to kill zebra mussels at certain temperatures. We have $20,000 identified in our work plan for this work, which we would be contributing. The USGS is contributing funds, and then for the MACERC grant. We were invited for a full proposal on February 4th, and we were supposedly should hear a grant award decision, I believe, sometime this spring. And then finally, I just wanted to also remind you, I believe you got an email, but we're planning an AAS Spotlight event for Thursday, April 21st at the Midtown Community Center to highlight a lot of this work that I just discussed today, as well as all the other work we're doing. Kind of since we've started the program, we've had a lot of information. It'll be a good chance to get it out there. So I hope you all can come.
Thank you very much. Questions, managers? Good to see AIS staff out in force tonight.
Yes.
Thanks for your report. Oh, and you may as well keep your seat because
You're
you're going to be up next.
You're right.
No permits this evening, so we'll move on to items removed from the consent agenda, which is 7.2 to 7.6. Mr. Fieldseth.
Can we jump ahead and do the audit so we can release auditor that's been sitting here waiting to make his presentation.
That's an excellent suggestion, if you don't mind, Mr. Filter.
That's fine.
Now that Mark's learned about the carp and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Gibbs, thank you, Manager Miller.
didn't know carp lived for 4 years, I'll tell you that.
Those are babies, right? Like middle-aged carp or something?
Oh, well, thank you. It's a great question.
No, right there's fine. Go ahead.
President White and managers, we've completed the audit for the district for the year ended December 31st, 15. Thank you for the opportunity to be of service to the district. I want to just maybe summarize what we've had tonight because we've met with Lars and with David and with Manager Miller as far as the audit committee on Monday and went through the audits and the findings, and then met with the executive committee tonight. So I have the audit. You've all been issued a draft audit, so I'll be certainly happy to answer any questions. But I've gone through the main points of the audit, so I'll just summarize kind of quickly tonight. The audit opinion, we have issued a clean opinion on the district's finances, which means we don't have any material findings, and we believe the financial statements are fairly presented as a whole. We've issued reports required by the state of Minnesota on the legal compliance audit, and we have there's 5 different levels of testing that are done on that, and we have no findings with the state of Minnesota legal compliance audit. And we've also issued an opinion on the internal control of the district. As part of the audit, we're required to obtain an understanding of the internal control of the district, not to specifically give an opinion on that, but to obtain an understanding of internal control good enough to form an opinion on the financial statements. And we've done that as well and completed that and have no material findings in the audit of internal control. In other words, nothing came to our attention to indicate that there was a significant deficiency. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that anybody has throughout the report. Go ahead.
Manager Olson.
I heard you twice say material findings. Are there other types of findings?
Well, this is a little bit of cover your back language, but what we say is we didn't find any nothing came to our attention to indicate there was a significant deficiency.
Okay. Thanks.
Well,
Manager Miller.
was there insignificant deficiencies?
I will just say no.
Okay. It seemed like I'd asked for that question.
It was an obvious ask.
You talked about, and you have tables in here that show the funds we have and how the reporting on all those funds is very well carried out.
Yeah,
Documented.
we feel that the district's budget process is very clear, concise, thoughtful. We have a budget that's put together in the summer. It's out for public opinion on September 15th. There's a 3-month period where people are able to comment, change it. It's finalized in December. All of your tax levy items are specifically allocated to any of your program or project funds. We spend a lot of time tracing those. Part of our audit is tracing the tax payments in to make sure that they're allocated to the funds the district has budgeted. It's been approved in your watershed plan. So that's where the significant level of our testing is done, and the report reflects that as well.
Thank you. Other questions?
And just for the benefit of Manager Becker, this is only the second time in many years that we've had no findings of that needed attention. So this is kind of a big deal.
Congratulations to staff.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was the board that did it.
There's enough credit to go around. Let's just say it that way. So if there are no other questions for Mr. Gibbs, then is there a motion to adopt the resolution accepting the audit? There's a motion. Is there a second? And that's for action this evening. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much, Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you very much, and
thanks
thanks to the staff as well. Thanks.
Good call there. Thank you. Now, Mr. Filter.
Managers, thank you. I have several items in front of you today they're all related, all for our watercraft inspection cost share grants and Roman Inspector program. This program has really been our main AS prevention tool for the district on preventing the spread of AS. We as a district, it's a relatively small agency, we're really not set up to staff watercraft inspectors in high numbers, manage all these seasonal employees, but a lot of our partners are. So we try to take advantage of our partners and the resources they have. They operate a lot of boat landings, we don't operate any. But what our role can be is, providing financial resources to help keep those programs going and sustainable. So in front of you today, it's very similar to previous years. We kind of have, our main partners that we've been working with who will keep working on it. We have our watercraft inspection cost share grants with the City of Shorewood, which is Christmas Lake, Carver County, which is Lake Minnewaska, the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board, which is the Minneapolis chain of lakes, so access is on Calhoun, Harriet, and Nokomis. We do not have our grant request yet from the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District, but we do expect that soon, and we'll be bringing that back next month. And then we have a roaming watercraft inspection program. So what this program does is it provides inspection services and prevention efforts at lakes in the district, which otherwise would not receive any inspector coverage from any of our partners. They're typically lower use lakes. So we've been paying 100% of the cost of this program, but we've been able to partner with Carver County and Three Rivers to deliver the actual service. So again, it's a good partnership. And really what we have noticed is, even on these low-use lakes, the roaming inspector program, it's not 100%, but boaters knowing inspectors could be there at any time, I think it does provide some change in boater behavior, knowing that there's a good chance you might get expected when you go to that water body. So I could certainly provide more history on any of the programs, or if you have enough information, we're looking for approval for these items today.
Before discussion, is there a motion? I'm sorry, I'm not going to take it that way. Manager Olson.
I was going to say, these are consent items that were pulled, correct? I would like to understand the reason for pulling them.
Sure. These are all in our work plan. It's a plan. And in my mind, the work plan is not an authorization to spend funds. And so this did not go through the operations committee, didn't go through the planning committee. And at least there's no indication of that in any of the background material, and so I thought it'd be more than appropriate for us to have a presentation on what this is going to be before we authorize expenditure.
Thank you.
And I guess if there's more questions, I have a couple.
Go ahead.
What has been in the past? What's the experience in the past in terms of growth or reduction in these both the cost share grants or the roaming inspections, and what do you expect going forward?
Sure. So let's start with Christmas Lake, for example. They had a program in place up till 2014. They were going with using a firm called Bolt Workforce Solutions. They were basically a staffing agency. So at Christmas Lake, it's Shorewood City Park, so it's open from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. There's a gate that goes down outside those hours. They were previously doing inspections from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., so there was still a 2-hour gap at the end of that period. 2014, zero mussels were introduced, inspections were stopped because access was temporarily closed at that time from August on. Going into 15, there's definitely, with the Volt Workforce Solutions, supervision lacking with inspectors as far as direct oversight. And they also decided to get out of the inspection business. So those two things together forced the city and the homeowners association to look at alternative providers. They found one in waterfront restoration. with a higher level of service and more direct supervision came a higher cost. So that increased the cost at Christmas Lake. They also, starting last year, developed a 2-year pilot program with the DNR with decontamination. So any watercraft coming in that has a ballast tank that could carry water is automatically decontaminated. Excuse me. So decontamination is now part of it. And then going into this season, they wanted to close the last remaining gaps in their coverage, so that 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. So there's 2 additional hours of daily of coverage in this program. So they're now providing service from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., which is all the available open hours from early April, depending on the season, to the end of October. So I believe that program is now at its max capacity. I don't foresee any reason why it should grow and why the cost should go up in future years. Carver County, Lake Minnewaska, they have expanded their coverage a little bit over the years. It's been pretty steady. They are looking to, they've typically ended early September in the past. You're looking to provide coverage through the end of September now. So there is kind of an extra month of service added on. And Lake Minnewaska also has park hours in place. So that program, I really don't envision it growing much beyond this as well. Certainly, they could decide to, add staffing into October, but from what I gather from Carver County, they're reevaluating, they're going through some reevaluation processes as well on their priorities and water bodies. So I don't know if it'll grow beyond that, but I don't envision much if it does.
Were these applications just driven at a staff level, or did the Carver County Board or the City of Shorewood?
My understanding is these organizations usually present their program to their different boards. They usually, I don't know if there's actual approval to apply for the grants, or if it's, we receive the grant request from staff typically. So I don't know if there was prior approval from their board to apply for that, or if it's just known that these grants are available and discussed as part of the program, contingent our approval. But we usually get a grant request from those staff.
Manager Miller?
What percent of the boats that enter Lake Minnetonka are inspected?
Lake Minnetonka, that's certainly a tough lake to have anywhere near 100%. I don't know the exact percent. Beyond the public accesses, there's marinas. Beyond marinas, there's other public right-of-ways to get into the lake that people can use. Our goal on Minnetonka is to provide a reasonable amount of inspections to really reduce all the zoomosis leaving the lake and reducing the risk of spreading to other lakes. So I can't give you an exact percentage. It would just be a total guess. I don't know how many inspections would occur in a given season.
Manager Olson?
You said Volt was getting out of the business. What did Lake Minnetonka do last year? How did the LMCD staff then, if they didn't have Volt?
Yeah, so Manager Olson managers Lake Minnetonka Conservation District also use Volt. They were able to work on an arrangement with Three Rivers Park District to basically they contract with them to provide inspector services. Three Rivers already provided inspections at Minnetonka Regional Park, so they were on the lake. They did have a big staffing capacity with seasonal employees and inspectors, so they took over inspections for their lake Minnetonka, just contracting directly with Three Rivers.
Does that mean that Three Rivers is going inside or outside of their own authority, or their own space?
Yeah, it would appear that they do provide some inspections at those launches that are Park District launches.
Wow.
Manager Miller?
I don't want to jump in anybody else's parade here, but what percentage of this is public relations versus enforcement? You know, this massive program on Christmas Lake didn't work. And now I would suggest we're probably politically connected to continue it because we started it and we'd be criticized if we don't, but how effective is this, or is it just PR and education?
I think you have to view it as any kind of prevention as risk reduction, and there's degrees of that. Certainly on Christmas Lake, you know, that's a great unknown, I think, still, of how they got in there. There's a lot of rumors. We'll never know for sure if it was a boat, if it was missed by an inspector, if somebody came in after hours through the gates, you know, whatever. We just don't know those circumstances. Other than that, I mean, I think inspections have been successful. You know, Minneapolis Park Board, their system is, I think, is very thorough. They have inspectors on duty anytime those launches are open. They stopped quite a few watercraft with zebra mussels, so I do believe those lakes would be infested right now without the inspection program. Lake Minnewaska, they stop a handful every year. We've stopped some on Pearson's. So there has been a lot of intercepts of watercraft with zebra mussels. That being said, there's a lot of ways for things to get in lakes. Nothing's ever 100%. But if you look at risk reduction, a lot of these programs are pretty high on that risk reduction level, I believe. And certainly Lake Minnetonka has, it's just its own unique lake with so many accessible ways to get on there. It's very difficult to prevent everything there.
But each of these resolutions is consistent with our comp plan, our work plans, and in the budget.
Yes.
All of them within what we have previously allowed for. Are there any other questions? I'll start asking for motions.
I'm not going to vote for this only just as a symbol, I guess,
Okay.
because I don't think it's more than education and politically correct, because I don't think we're going to accomplish what we set out to do, but I don't think I'm willing to try to head this, stop this, because I think the political ramifications would be great, because people would say that. But I noticed the LMCD folks didn't even stay for the presentation, so it must not be that important, at least in their minds, that they would stay to listen to the presentation and the discussion. But anyhow, I'm going to vote no.
I can't read minds. I don't know why they left.
No.
A question, Bishop?
I apologize, I had to take a phone call earlier. Thank you for moving this back so I could take part in this conversation. I agree with Dick. I think there's a value to education. I think there's a value to, it's easy to focus on how did this get into Christmas Lake, or how did this get into our lakes, when the real question is, you know, we start talking about stony waters. How do we prevent this from spreading? Which is not the in, it's the out once you identify that it's in. Of course, on the flip side, you look at the chain of lakes in Minneapolis, and they've kept it out repeatedly. I do view this as being positive education. You know, I have friends who just bought a boat last year, and when I pointed out that they wanted to go onto the chain of lakes and they wanted to go onto Lake Minnetonka, I said, well, you do understand that there's zebra mussels in one body of water, not in the other. And they said, well, what does that mean? I said, that means you're going to have to clean your trailer and your boat, and make sure you get it really clean before you put it back in chain of lakes. And having somebody at the launches there's value to that. This almost feels like a zombie program. It just keeps moving because it exists. I wish I could indicate that there's clear efficacy in doing this all the places we are doing it, in part because we're not getting all the hours that the launches are open, and we're not getting all the launches and all the water bodies that we're paying to have organizations operating. And so I'm not going to vote for this for those reasons, but I also acknowledge this is in the work plan, this is in our budget, and we had a debate last fall about this. And, I'm glad we were able to discuss it tonight.
Can I have a motion to approve resolutions 16-021?
So moved.
Is there a second? Olson and Becker. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No, wish to be recorded.
Opposed are Miller and Shackleton. Resolution 16-022, is there a motion to approve?
Well,
Did I skip one?
7.3, okay, thank you.
Item 7.3, is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No,
Nay.
wish to be recorded.
Same, 5-2. Item 7.4, resolution 16-023, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Well, I supported, I know you're not supposed to defend your vote after the vote's taken, but I supported the park board because it has been effective.
So you're voting yes on 023?
Yes.
That is a 6-1 vote. Thank you, everyone. On resolution 16-024, Carver County, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No,
Nay.
5-2.
wish to be recorded.
On resolution 16-025, Three Rivers Park District, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
No, wish to be recorded.
5-2. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Filson.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Ms. Schaufler. We're at item 11.3.
Madam Chair, managers, tonight staff is seeking authorization to grant Hennepin County easements on 2 district properties to install weather stations. As we discussed last week with the Policy and Planning Committee, the 2014 flooding spurred a good coordination between the district and Hennepin County Emergency Management. And with that coordination, the county recently inquired if the district would be interested and willing to allow the county to install weather stations on 2 district properties. So what the weather stations would be is part of this Hennepin West Mesonet network, which is a network that the county has developed to help inform emergency managers with environmental conditions to help them make the best real-time decisions. This is the most sophisticated weather station in the nation as it receives data every minute, and all that data goes directly into the National Weather Service local forecast. So as we discussed last week, this is the first benefit to the district, as the district's recently been working with the National Weather Service to see their ability to use the district's current XP SWIM model, which is the district's hydrologic model, to see if they can input weather forecast to help understand the effect on the watershed, upper watershed, and specifically on Lake Minnetonka. We can then use that to help inform dam operations to be a little bit more proactive and fully understand the effects and how to make adjustments. The second benefit would be that we'd be able to use the data to help calibrate that model as well. So this is one of the proposed sites. It is proposed in the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed. So as you just got updates on this, Mud Lake is to the southwest, and the proposed station would be on the Gould property where the Star is. So immediately downstream of this weather station, as 6 Mile Creek drains to the northeast, is a continuous monitoring station that our water quality has. So with this, we can have real-time weather data and know immediately what's happening downstream to the flow and height of the creek, which will then allow us to calibrate that upper watershed model. The same thing is true up by Painter Creek, where the second weather station is proposed. So Painter Creek flows from On this picture, from the northwest to the southeast, the weather station's at the Star, and then at downstream at West Branch Road, it's another continuous level monitoring station. Another benefit to these weather stations is having real-time weather data in two sub-watersheds, which is Painter Creek and 6 Mile Creek, where the district's actively planning and implementing projects. So in the project maintenance department, being able to understand what's happening real-time when we're doing projects helps us to monitor project development and establishment throughout the 3-year warranty of a project. And then another benefit is just helping continuing that relationship with Hennepin County and finding more ways to progress our flood resiliency across the district. So here are the things that the weather stations would measure. Here's a side profile view of the station, and then here is a picture of a current weather station that Hennepin County has at their Public Works facility in Medina. As we discussed last week at the Policy and Planning Committee, so there's a lot of soil measurements, which the county's goal there is to develop a first of its kind landslide model, which will help identify risk areas in the county. And as you remember, in 2014, we had 9 landslides around the Lake Minnetonka area. So this could go to help potentially reduce those landslide risks where there was property damage. Concerns we, as staff, investigated was the fence itself. So we requested that the fence be no taller than 5 feet, as at both these sites we have active prairie restoration going on, so we thought that the prairie vegetation would help mask most of that height. Another concern we had was being able to terminate the easement if the land use changed where we wanted to dispose of the property, so that is written into the agreement. If we do authorize it, we just have to give the county a 3-year heads up, as there is quite a bit of funds that go into installing these, and then to be able to continue to have that steady data, they'd like to find a place nearby. And then our last concern was, since there is active prairie vegetation at both these sites, just being able to manage that and not have it interfere with this, and they said that wouldn't be a problem. They actively will keep the vegetation within the fenced area mowed very short, so it doesn't interfere with their measurements, and then for burning outside of that area, they said that'd be fine, and in fact, the weather station could help inform some of those conditions and help identify the best time to burn. So with that, tonight I am seeking authorization to grant Hennepin County the easements, and I can take any questions.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
My question, Ms. Schaufler, is how it would help prevent landslides?
So what they're looking to do is identify areas, and this is just kind of my basic understanding, and see if there's common factors that's gone into the areas where they have had landslides, and then if there are those common features, what they plan to do is then approach cities and change city codes, and then also approach insurance companies to get that changed so people can have insurance if they live in those areas.
Thank you. Are there other questions? We have a motion and second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Item 11.4 is resolution 16-028. Deer Hill Preserve, Ms. Damjancic. Do you say Damjancic?
Damjancic, that's right.
I pronounce it incorrectly.
That's okay, it's
Below
toughy.
these many years.
That's okay.
I'll try to do better.
Okay.
How do you pronounce it?
Damjancic.
You're just lucky to have Miller as a last name.
What's that?
You're just lucky to have Miller as a last name.
Yeah.
My mother went from Jones to Damjancic.
So must have been love, right?
That's right. Madam President, managers, tonight I'd like to provide just a little bit of background information for the members of the board that haven't been present for the PBC updates on this project. In January of 2015, Mike and Sue Sealand of Property Resources Development Corporation met with the district about their plans to develop a 170-acre subdivision under the City of Medina's
Conservation Design Plan Unit Development Ordinance. And this ordinance allows for a density bonus if they cluster lots, and they also put wetlands, wetland buffers, steep slopes, and an additional 30% of the upland areas into conservation easement. And this would protect about 90 acres on this site. The Sealands approached the district as also being a potential conservation easement holder. And in response to that, the district executed a memorandum of understanding with the developers in last spring. And since that time, we've been providing technical assistance and coordinating with their team in the city to refine plans for the development, offer technical assistance, and also draft the easement and the associated documents. Since last year, this site has been renamed. I can kind of point out the general area. This is the property here, and it was formerly named Stonegate Development. Since that time, the developers changed the name to Deerfield Preserve. It's this kind of linear portion, 170 acres, and then this portion out to the west here is actually the Reckelbacher property, so they actually share a property line. The district's interest in serving in this role stems from an interest in providing a habitat conservation corridor between Baker Park, which sits to the west of the site, and then Woolsfold Woods, which sits to the east of the site. The district is also working with other private landowners, such as the Reckelbachers, to institute conservation and restoration practices on their private properties. With a limited investment of staff time in terms of providing technical assistance and coordination, the district will have a role in protecting these 90 acres, and that includes a substantial portion of an intact tamarack bog, other wetland and woodland areas on the site, and then also restored wetlands and upland areas of the site. These areas will also be accessible by public trail, so that's another benefit to the public. Over the past several weeks, we've been working with the developers team to draft the conservation easement and the associated documents, and those are coming to final draft form at this point. And we hope to bring the final document for final execution to the board in April. But to keep in step with the city's review process of the final plat, they'd like to have a kind of vote of support from the district that they are in favor of the process that the staff has covered through this point, and that we're kind of reaching a final phase of the restoration or the development of the documents. So at 4 committee updates over the past year, the PBC committee has voiced support for the process and the drafting of the documents. And we have also resolved a couple questions that were brought to the PPC meeting last March 17th. And so tonight, staff requests that the board pass a resolution of support for the concept of acting as the easement holder for the Deerfield Preserve CDPUD. Take any questions you have.
Thank you. First, is there a motion to approve the resolution?
So
Is there a second?
Second.
Miller and Rognes. Questions? Manager Becker.
Ms.
Damianchich. There you go.
How is this shown on the property deed?
The conservation easement will be, the district will be the conservation easement holder, and then the developer will hold the fee to the conservation areas up until the time that the HOA is established, and then the underlying fee will be transferred to the homeowners association at that time.
Is it filed with the deed in Hennepin County, or perhaps Mr. Smith knows the answer to this?
Madam Chair, Manager Becker, the easement will be recorded when it's executed according to code.
And it'll go on the deed, so future buyers will see it.
Yes.
That's correct.
Technically, it doesn't go on the deed, but it goes into the title
title.
record, and its deed is subject to the easement record.
Because we have Torrance property.
Well, it would be true either way, but this, I assume, will be Torrance. But it will be of record, and I've noticed the whole world will know.
And what's our statutory authority to hold easements?
There is state statute that specifies the watershed district is an appropriate authority to hold the easement. I'm not certain of the statute.
Chapter.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Manager Becker, the district in the powers explicitly granted to watershed managers has included the right to acquire and hold real property interests for conservation purposes.
Thank you.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 11.5, Resolution 16-029, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, President White and managers. I'm here seeking authorization to issue a request for qualifications for 6 Mile Plan development support. As we know, 6 Mile will be our first focal geography plan. The 6 Mile system is very complicated. There's lots of interrelated water resource issues that cross multiple jurisdictions. So to address that, we've developed a plan that integrates district work with the local plans, priorities, and goals of the many communities and agencies that are out here. Over the last month or so, President White and Manager Olson and I met with policymakers and staff from cities, agencies, both counties out in this subwatershed and briefed them on the planning process that we would be following. Those meetings are complete, and we are looking forward to kicking off this planning process in sort of mid to late April. And we're now seeking support to issue a request for qualifications to bring a consultant team on board to support this plan development process. So just a quick refresher on the process that we're talking about. We'll be bringing all the partners together in a policy advisory committee and technical advisory committee. The district will first lay the foundation of the natural resource needs that are out here. We got a taste of that earlier from Ms. Cook. Next, we will look at local plans and priorities and planned investments. So things like comprehensive plans, capital improvement plans, park and recreation priorities, and any major capital investments, and identifying sort of the direction that some of these agencies are moving. We'll then take all that work, integrate it together in what we've sort of outlined as a layering process, and then we'll use that to identify opportunities and finally develop an investment framework and an implementation framework. So I've included in your packet an outline of the process, and we also went through this at the Planning and Policy Committee last night. So what you see here above the timeline is the meeting structure that I've laid out. So first, developing that water resource framework, then starting to identify local plans and priorities. Meeting 3 is when we'll look at integrating those priorities, and then meeting 4 is when we'll be presenting an investment framework. And what we've developed below that timeline is all of the work that has to get done between meetings. So what we're looking at right now is the earliest we'd be able to bring a consultant on would be sort of mid-May. So in advance of bringing a consultant on, staff will be working to start to mine the plans of others. So we'll be reading through comprehensive plans, any investment plans, infrastructure plans, and we'll start to sort of pull out the highlights and identify the plans and priorities of these agencies and synthesize them into a report. That report can then be used sort of as an onboarding tool for the consultant, and then we'll also be looking to them as sort of one of their first tasks to synthesize that information and use that as well as some other background information that we'll provide to work with us to develop the first deliverable, which would be sort of a plan introduction and vision. Those will feed into our second meeting where we'll be presenting to the local policymakers what we've pulled out as some priorities, and we'll essentially be vetting those, making sure that we got it right, and also looking for to see if we missed anything, if there are opportunities or plans that are maybe not represented currently in any planning documents, and to make sure that we're representing sort of the direction of these agencies as they'd like to be recognized. So once we've gone through that buy-off process, that will kick off phase 2, which is really when the bulk of the planning work is done, and that's sort of what we've outlined as that layering process. With phase 2, we'll start to see how those plans, priorities, sort of direction of these agencies actually appear on the landscape. So we're going to do that by engaging in a collaborative mapping exercise. So with the consultant as sort of the creative force here, they'll be able to work with us to meet in, well, I guess first we're dividing the subwatershed into management units, and we have presented here draft management units, and these are sort of based on natural resources, any political government lines, hydrology. So within each of those management units, we'll be looking to go through a collaborative mapping exercise where we'll identify some of those priorities, develop sort of a rough vision that integrates all this different work. And I think the best way to sort of explain that is to look at an example. So in the Pearson-Wasserman subwatershed or planning unit, that's probably the area of the subwatershed that right now we're seeing the most land use change sort of happening in real time. So the city of Victoria is, they're looking to, there will be a major road redevelopment going through the system. Here, I'll stand up to explain this. So they're looking to expand a county road that will impact some wetlands and shape development into the future. They own a lot of land through this developing area. They are interested in some regional trail planning that would connect through Marsh up to Wasserman and eventually up to the Carver Park Reserve. And they're also looking at some new development that's happening along the fringe. We're interested in out here, there's abundant wetland resources. We know we have some existing water impairments. This is a system with really abundant carp, and we'll probably be we will be developing recommendations around how to manage carp. So the idea is to work with the City of Victoria and start to integrate all of these different pieces, and rather than approach each piece of land as its own issue, we come up with a vision together so that we have an approach as all this land use change is happening. And it not only applies on that management unit level, but we also will then want to sort of scale up these visions and see how it connects through the system. So that Pearson-Marsh-Wasserman corridor also eventually sort of relates up to Carver Park, which relates to the rest of the system. That particular planning unit is unique in a way because of all the land use change that's happening, so that level of analysis isn't necessarily where we'll land for every planning unit. So for example, Carver Park, it's all owned by Three Rivers. They have some management plans in place. So that will sort of primarily be a water resource plan. So each unit is different and will require a different level of scrutiny. So once we've kind of gone through that mapping exercise and have come to agreement with those, with the staff that we're working with, we'll develop draft plans from those with some narrative description, and those draft plans will then be vetted through the policymakers in the Policy Advisory Committee, and that'll be done in meeting 3 to, again, make sure that we're all in concurrence. The final phase is developing the implementation and investment plan. We have some work still in figuring out the details of that phase, but at this point we know that an important component will be developing an investment committee that will be a subset of those other committees to start to identify local sources of funding, how we'll leverage the district levy against regional, state, and federal resources, and sort of how that matches up to the projects that we've identified through that visioning stage. And then the consultant will also be involved at this point in helping us put the final plan together. So I'll quickly run through the roles and responsibilities here. So the consultant would be coming on board to support planning analysis. So by planning analysis, I mean they'll help synthesize these plans and goals of different agencies. They'll help display the relationships between natural systems and the built environment. And they'll help us to identify some of the opportunities that sort of bubble through in that integration process. A lot of their work will be in actually developing the regional plans, the area plans for each of those units, and in certain projects that we identify, we'll want to be developing site plans as well. And then again, they'll help with the plan assembly. The district will take the project lead on visioning, direction, managing the process, and that consultant will also take the lead on developing that investment plan, and finally we'll be facilitating both the committee meetings and those sort of more informal planning exercise meetings. And finally, WANC will be integrally involved with representing the technical side of the water resource issues, providing engineering support, and also developing preliminary cost estimates and feasibility for some of those projects. So the timeline that we're looking at, we're hoping to release the request for qualifications on Monday, and we'll give them about 3 weeks to assemble their submissions. We will then review and hold interviews, and we are hoping that President White and Manager Olson as 6 Mile liaisons will help in that review process.
You know, I would like to ask President White if she would designate Kurt Rognus to sit in on that committee because of his incredibly extensive experience in assembling teams like this and being part of teams, because I think he might have some insight.
Let's circle back to that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Great. And then we'll be looking to make the final selection on April 25th, which will give us a short and busy time to develop a full scope of work with that selected team. And then we will be bringing the team and the scope to the board then on May 12th.
Manager Olson?
Quick question, how many people are we going to send RFQs to?
Thank you, Manager Olson. We don't have a full list of who we're sending them to yet.
Okay.
So I'm not sure at this time.
Just a question or a comment?
Well, there's 2 ways of going about it. You can just say, this is what we have as an opportunity, anybody sign up. And people read about it, and then they come to us. And then there's intent on our part to go to specific individuals that we know are qualified to do the work too. So I was just curious to see how we were going to handle that.
Manager Olson, we do have a sort of short list of consultants that we've been looking at. We also have some people who will serve as resources to help us develop a distribution list.
Okay.
So in the next 24 hours we'll have that finalized. But we will be sending it to specific firms and or contacts who might be able to send it to well-qualified teams.
Okay.
I have a couple of hands here, but Mr. Whisker, you come forward.
President White, Manager Olson, just to build off what Anna was saying, we've already reached out to a network of folks that we think would be likely respondents and prime the pump. It's always good with this kind of work, not everything comes through on paper, is to make sure that what we've put together is clear, compelling, that will generate responses. And so we've been doing that work. It'll be posted on the website broadly, but then, as Anna mentioned, we have a short list that we're rounding out tomorrow with feedback from some people that are more familiar with this level of RFQ for planning services. That'll flesh out the list between now and Monday, and then it'll be directly sent to those as well as broadcast.
Thank you.
Manager Miller?
First of all, I'd like to say that I really appreciate this diagram. I mean, it really makes it clear what we can expect and when. I mean, this is really, really well done. Yeah, especially when you've got so many different parties in here. You got with some straightforward outputs that you expect to deliver with a pretty aggressive timeline. I'm impressed with that. If you could share with the board when you send out the list, send a copy to by email or whatever to the board members and keep them informed.
Sure.
Okay.
Let's take this, just the resolution first. Is there a motion to approve resolution 16-029?
So moved.
Second.
We're fighting to do it. Olson and Miller. Any discussion on the resolution, Manager Blixt?
I was just curious, because I'm just trying to picture who would be qualified to do this. So I just get a sense of what we're looking at. I am kind of baffled.
I think a range of different consultants come to mind, and what we're asking for is consultants to assemble teams that fulfill the unique skill sets that we're looking for, in particular, which are described on that front page. I think some of the firms that are out there that could probably we could expect to see applications from include firms like LHB. They're very familiar with doing sort of regional site and area site master plans. Hoisington Kogler, who did a substantial amount of work for Southwest LRT, kind of in the same vein, with a regional corridor project and then specific site area plans, and worked with committees to develop investment frameworks. Some of the traditional firms that have worked more routinely with municipalities, that kind of operate more routinely in this realm, WSB and some of the engineering companies might assemble some of their internal skills with other different consulting groups. So I think those are some good examples. We're currently working with LHB and pretty happy with the level of product that they've been developing for the Blake Road corridor.
Thank you. Manager Rogness.
Would landscape architecture be something that you would
Definitely.
find as a key ingredient to that?
Yep, that's listed right in there, and that's a big one. And not all landscape architects, as you probably know, Manager Rogness, are created equal in terms of how they operate or where they operate, at which kind of scale. And so I think what's unique and exciting about this project is the ability to do site master plans, which a lot of landscape architects do, but the small area or sub-regional plans, and then weave those all together into some sort of cohesive regional plan, is going to require a certain assemblage of skills and vision and creativity, as well as project management abilities and just the technical abilities of pulling all of this material together and actually layering it together and doing the analysis.
Other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Manager Miller.
I just wanted to request that you ask Manager Rogness to audit the committee that you and Manager Olson will be sitting on.
Certainly, we can let him know all of our meetings.
Can you put up that
Yes.
slide that showed the Lake Town zone?
So This,
One
this
more,
one,
there you go.
yeah.
It just occurred to me that this is just my little theory here.
Mhm.
We saw a slide earlier from University of Minnesota that said the carp wintered in this part of the bay in a tight group.
Mm-hmm.
1 year.
One year.
And this last year, they were up here. And this subdivision was going in at that time. All the roads and all the heavy equipment, all the noise and vibration.
Oh.
I wonder if we didn't drive them up into the northern part of that.
Carp management by noise, I like it.
Well, unfortunately, the fisherman was not willing to fish in that northern part of Wasserman, so that development really did a disservice for carp management.
Yeah, there are a lot of dead trees that are in the bottom.
Mm.
Makes it impossible for their nets. Literally.
All right.
Thank you for
Thank
putting
you
that
very
Yes,
back up.
thank you.
Item 11.6, Resolution 16-030, Mr. Whisker.
That's never a good noise. Let's try somewhere else. Let's try a different hole. Uh-oh. There we go. That's half the battle. Is it going to show up here? Okay. Technologically impaired here, I'm sorry.
That looks helpful.
Okay. President White, managers, here tonight requesting authorization to execute a cooperative agreement with Park Nicollet Health Services for purposes of developing floodplain solutions for the Methodist Hospital campus, as well as cooperatively engaging in master planning for the campus. Sub-request in the resolution is to authorize the administrator to execute a contract with Wenck Associates in an amount not to exceed $24,940 with a not to exceed amount for the watershed district of $12,469.50. I'm going to provide a little bit of background here. This was reviewed last week at the Planning and Policy Committee meeting. But where I want to start with is just a little bit of background on how the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District between 2007 and 2009 engaged in the first Greenway partnership with Park Nicollet when Park Nicollet Health Services for Methodist Hospital campus approached the Watershed District with basically a development request for their Heart and Vascular Center addition. And at that point in time, the Watershed District and Park Nicollet entered into somewhat of an organic planning relationship, much similar to what we're requesting authorization to do tonight, to try and achieve something that was larger than what the regulations would require on their own. And the concept plans that came out of that project reoriented the campus around the 10 acres of wetland that was essentially at the time behind the Methodist Hospital campus. And the net result was the first stream remeander on Minnehaha Creek and habitat restoration and wetland enhancement through the site, with Park Nicollet designing and building a boardwalk through campus. Now, since then, we've done a lot more work in the Greenway upstream and soon to be downstream at Meadowbrook Golf Course. Yeah, but in between all of that work, in 2014, we had record high water. And the impact of that on the Methodist Hospital campus was pretty substantial. They had to go out there and put in about 30,000 sandbags, and they were pumping feverishly to maintain operations, critical operations at their principal loading dock, kind of in the center of the campus on the west side, creek-facing side. So that precipitated Park Nicollet Engineering Services wanting to evaluate the opportunity for a flood wall in this location that would remove this section of campus from the floodplain, and would also require compensatory storage to be created if they did that. And in response to that initial inquiry, in January of 2015, the Watershed District and Park Nicollet executed a memorandum of understanding to say that the two parties would work together and engage with St. Louis Park to look creatively at this flood wall solution and how compensatory storage might be created, and look strategically on-site and off-site at what some potential solutions might be. We're really back to looking on-site just because of how the floodplain in this area works and how spatially constrained the hospital is. But I wanted to review briefly what Park Nicollet has developed just in way of very preliminary concept. In terms of the flood wall, this is that loading dock section right here, right in the middle of the map. And so they're looking at building a section of flood wall that would tie into the existing structure and run north several hundred feet and remove about 1,200 yards of active flood storage that is their loading dock from the floodplain. And their preliminary regulatory analysis or solutions analysis with Bar Engineering was to locate the 1,200 cubic yards of compensatory flood storage that they would need on the southwest corner of their campus, just northeast of Excelsior Boulevard in Louisiana, near that building that's on stilts. The Watershed District, St. Louis Park, and Park Nicollet got together to review that concept, and while ultimately, if it progressed and was advanced, may meet the regulatory requirements, there are a variety of concerns that were flagged at that time. Number one, it would require some pretty extensive vegetation removal up and down that section of the creek, which currently screen the Park Nicollet's built piece of the property, the clinic, and the classroom building that's on stilts from the creek. It would also encroach off of their real estate. It would excavate somewhat quite close to the banks of the existing meander. And it would also, it has some cost implications. To do this work, they'd have to relocate some HVAC equipment that's currently in the area and relocate that somewhere else on the campus, likely on the roof of some of the building, driving up the cost. So Park Nicollet, the Watershed District, and St. Louis Park took a pause and decided to look at some alternatives. And I'm going to run you through that quickly, because that's the basis of the requested action tonight. The first thing that the Watershed District did is evaluate potential floodplain storage needs in the area for the future. And so first we quantified the amount of floodplain storage that would be needed to be created to offset the removal of the loading docks from the floodplain. That's about 1,200 cubic yards. In addition, we looked further north into the surface parking lots that we know are flood prone. They flooded in 2014 and are located in the 100-year floodplain area. And there's essentially three different areas. And the notion here was that in the future, as Southwest Light Rail progresses, or if Park Nicollet wants to develop those, and they move to a structured parking solution and wanted to put buildings in those areas, they'd be required to raise those areas about 2 feet above the existing 100-year floodplain to meet regulations of low opening freeboard. So we calculated the total amount of flood storage, assuming those areas might be filled in the future, giving us a total of about 7,000 yards needed. Then we looked at LIDAR basically to look at the opportunity for a wetland enhancement project that will provide ecological lift across the site and reinvest in the campus's natural resources, honoring the initial spirit of the Watershed District and Park Nicollet's partnership while creating the required amount of flood storage. And I think 7,000 yards is probably a stretch, so not all of those floodplain areas may be able to be compensated for in this area, although it's quite close. We could probably get somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 yards. The devil would be in the details in terms of what a final design might look like if you were to do a wetland restoration through this area. So what we did in talking with St. Louis Park and Park Nicollet, who didn't want to plan that far out into the future, is take a first blush look at what a concept might look like for creating flood storage through a wetland enhancement that would meet just the 1,200 yard needs for the flood wall. And this is not what any project would look like, but it was for illustrative purposes to advance the discussion with Park Nicollet and St. Louis Park. Inside that blue boundary, the blue line, The green areas would essentially be restored vegetatively and managed. You may do some excavation to get your 1,200 yards, and then there's some on-site areas that have been filled historically that are now woodland areas that could be enhanced and managed. And so that's one concept that we brought to Park Nicollet. And when we met with Park Nicollet and St. Louis Park, they expressed their mutual interest in advancing a cooperative agreement framework that would essentially have two prongs, and that's outlined in your packet tonight. One prong would advance the concept that I just outlined as opposed to excavation in that southwest quadrant. It would advance a floodplain mitigation solution that would be doubled up with wetland enhancement. And that would be the purpose of that first prong in the cooperative agreement and part of a scope of services that Park Nicollet would pay. So they would pay the $15,000 to advance that regulatory solution to do a wetland enhancement. They're very interested, given the work that Wenck has done thus far in contracting directly with Wenck Associates. And they, in the cooperative agreement, one of the principal terms is Park Nicollet would obviously reserve the right to, at some point, at staged milestones through the design of this floodplain solution, walk away from either the flood wall completely or revert back to their initial design based on a mutual discussion. And the district's role in that part of the agreement would essentially to be facilitate the permitting process, which is our role anyway, but do it in a proactive partnership posture, bringing in the Corps and the DNR quickly to gauge their interest in this project and what their regulatory scope would be. We've already reached out and connected with both, and they're very interested in coming to the table proactively and actually informing the design, as well as providing what the regulatory scope would be for the project. The second prong that Park Nicollet, St. Louis Park, and the district are, I think, interested in advancing is beyond just that floodplain footprint, a campus master plan. And so that is the purpose of the scope of services that's included in the packet, the $24,940 that would be right now split 50-50 between Park Nicollet and the Watershed District to look at opportunities throughout the site to enhance and manage sustainably long-term the natural resources on campus. This was the first project in the Greenway, and it wasn't built with the Greenway in mind. And so I think it's worthwhile for the district to take advantage of this opportunity and revisit the campus and look at opportunities to bring the campus in line with the rest of the work that's going on or has gone on around it. The scope of investigation there in the scope of services would look at creating additional flood storage, opportunities for regional stormwater management, upstream and downstream trail connections. So specifically at Louisiana Avenue, figuring out how pedestrians are going to move from Meadowbrook Golf Course north across Excelsior Boulevard and navigate through the corridor, whether they're doing that on City Street or potentially through the campus on the existing trail or new trail on the southwest bank. And then at Louisiana, which is programmed for reconstruction in the city's capital improvement plan, there are preliminary plans to create an underpass and a switchback that would connect our upstream meander work of Reach 20 with Methodist Hospital. So we'd be able to proactively look at that and build it into the city's road reconstruction in, I think, 2018. Some of the other things that we'd be looking at is just enhancing the overall pedestrian experience. If you go out on the boardwalk today in the middle of summer, you'll bake. There's no shade, and that's because it's out in the middle of a wetland. But there are some opportunities to bring in different plant species that will create a different look and aesthetic and shade and experience that I think is comparable to some of the work that we have upstream, so we'd look at that. We'd also look at managing some targeted view sheds. When the project was first built, the trail was set back quite a distance from the creek because it was one of our first meander projects. And the vegetation management at that time was given off to Park Nicollet, who committed only to a 3-year establishment phase. So there's been no long-term veg management in certain areas of the project. And as a result, there's some locations where you were planned on seeing the creek that you can't really see the creek. So we'd look at very targeted management options to price those out, see what ecological improvement it would create, and could you, kind of reconnect the view sheds from the boardwalk to the creek. One of the other things that we would look at is something that's been in Park Nicolet's design charrette history. They have food services or cafe within the hospital that they've looked at relocating throughout the campus at various points in time. And they're interested in expanding that out. It's a second floor food service area into an outdoor deck or opening up more views to the creek. And that's something that they'd like to fold in and see if that's possible. And then the final deliverable, we'd be looking to develop a long-term sustainable site management plan. As I mentioned, this was the first project. The way that we negotiated easements and site management doesn't match up comprehensively with what's going on in the rest of the corridor. So we'd look to expand our activities in the site in a collaborative fashion with St. Louis Park and Park Nicolet. What we'll be looking to do is essentially develop a concept plan that's evaluated all those different things, a high-level concept plan, and identify particular funding sources and their potential uses through site, leveraging opportunities that we've already put into action just west of Louisiana, like the Great River Greening Partnership that recently brought money to the table for veg management in the corridor. So the total cost of the contract for the second prong of work that's outlined in the cooperative agreement is $24,940. Initially last week we had discussed splitting that a third with St. Louis Park. The jury was still out in their ability to respond as quickly as we were to Park Nicolet's timing and desire to move forward with this work. And we've subsequently heard back that they wouldn't be able to take action until very late in April. And so they're supportive. They've stated that in writing. They're bringing this to council work session, I think, next week, and they'll be discussing it. And we'll be looking for St. Louis Park either way to be at the table, but potentially playing a catch-up role and inserting themselves through amendment into the agreement later. But as I mentioned, regardless, they'll be at the table and at all the major milestone meetings. So the cost of the district splitting it 50% with Park Nicolet is about $4,000 more than we discussed last week for a total not to exceed amount of $12,469.50. So today I'm asking authorization from the board for President White to execute a cooperative agreement with Park Nicolet, for authorization for the district administrator to execute a scope of services and contract with Wenck Associates for that $24,940. And some of the next steps include pre-application meeting with the Corps and the DNR to get the regulatory scoping and sort of proactive design assistance. In April, pretty quickly here in the next 3 weeks, we'll be looking for Park Nicolet to make some major decision milestones. One of the critical ones that's out there is St. Louis Park is currently revising their floodplain ordinance, which we discussed as a factor with the Meadowbrook Golf Course. And so Park Nicolet will have to decide, do they pursue a floodplain variance through the city's process, or do they wait for the city to revise their floodplain ordinance? And that will drive, I think, a big piece of the schedule, in addition to the Corps and the DNR permits that are needed. The hospital is looking ambitiously to start construction at the end of July or August on the flood wall. If we did floodplain wetland enhancement, that would be winter construction work. And then the master plan we'd bring back to the board kind of mid-year and map out what the opportunities are for next stage implementation, either next year or the year after, with more of a comprehensive look at how that would be phased out over time. So with that, I will take any questions that you might have.
Madam President?
Mr. Smith?
I just have one quick point I want to highlight. We've worked a lot with Mr. Whisker and staff on crafting this agreement so that it reflects a clear understanding and distinction between the district's role as a regulator in the review of a permit application process and then a partner in these broader enhancements. And so the language that was on the screen about facilitating permits from the Corps and the other entities is not language that we use in the agreement. What we talk about in the agreement is that we'll maintain our independent regulatory role, that we will retain an independent engineer if we need to review the work to complete our regulatory process, and that we will participate in a coordinated and efficient regulatory review with these other agencies. So we'll share our analysis, but we're not in a role of advocating on Park Nicolet's behalf for them to receive permits or kind of lose sight of our regulatory role. So that's reflected in the agreement. I just want to highlight that as you consider this.
Thank you for your expansion. I think
If I could also, one other point about language. I think there were two places in the agreement that Madam President recognized where there are parentheticals in the drafting that would be deleted in the formal agreement, and your resolution acknowledges that your approval is subject to non-substantive corrections in language from council. So I just wanted to recognize there's a few of those places.
Okay. Let's first have a motion to approve the resolution.
I'll move approval.
Manager Shekelton, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognes, Manager Brooks, do you have a question? No, I was recognizing that he had seconded the motion.
Oh.
Go ahead, Manager Brooks.
You have a question?
No. Seconded.
Okay, so my question was, no, I just got distracted. I'm wondering why we can't wait for St. Louis Park, I guess. To, you know, if they were intending to be a part of the agreement and they were gonna be a party to the financial commitment, why aren't we waiting for them to do so?
Manager Blix, managers, I think that's at the discretion of the board, if you'd like to do that. It's staff's recommendation to bring this forward without St. Louis Park currently written into the agreement, just based on discussions with Park Nicollet and St. Louis Park as this was being put together in the packet. Park Nicollet would like to move forward quickly. They'd like to link up with the district and start this work immediately. And if we wait, that will cost at least 30 days of schedule while we wait for the City of St. Louis Park Council to take action. There's a little bit of calculus on the board's part in the value and return on investment for the extra $4,000 of cost that the district is willing to bear and Park Nicollet is willing to bear. Park Nicollet's picked up 50% of the city's costs as well in order to advance quickly.
Okay. Other questions? Manager Shekelton.
What can they do in July? So they want, the intention is to start working in July. What can they do?
What?
No, I know, but I mean, I always thought that work usually would happen in the winter. And second, we don't have any idea what's going to happen in terms of precipitation between now and then.
Okay, so Manager Shekelton, managers, in terms of the work that Park Nicollet could likely complete from a constructability perspective, the flood wall would go in first. That's not winter construction work. It's all behind back of curb. It's in their existing parking lot or driveway access for the for the loading dock. So it's upland construction, concrete work. And then the wetland work, if it were to move forward, would take place in the winter. But that's one of the purposes for advancing quickly, is to figure out those logistics and make some decision points quickly. And for Park Nicollet and the district and St. Louis Park, although they're not written in, to work over the next month to reach some of those decision points on if they're able to move forward this quickly. They have expressed that that's their desired schedule, and I think we all know from our own projects about desired construction schedules and how quickly you want to move and then how quickly you can subsequently move based on permitting and funding and construction and all that sort of thing. And this is, they've have a budget appropriation for it. They've indicated that if worst came to worst, they could potentially push construction into next year. But right now, the momentum internally behind Park Nicollet is to keep things moving forward.
Thank you. Manager Miller.
You know what I'm excited about is the way that the staff is responding to all these opportunities. And rather than being blamed for slowing down stuff, no one else is able to keep up with us. And any like example, Japs Olson, they wanted to be under construction like a year ago, and we had all our work done, and they didn't catch up with it. So there was no blaming us for holding up this major project. And I think it should be kind of our mantra is that we'll meet anybody's time schedule as long as we don't violate any of our own rules and regulations. And I think it's really impressive that people seek us out as partners because they know we can deliver.
Manager Blixt?
I am pretty sure that this site is part of the Hennepin County list to FEMA for mitigation projects for the future, and could be potentially subject to funding for that. And so I'm just wondering how that would be incorporated into the agreement.
Manager Blix, managers, I don't have a specific answer to that. I just can't, I don't know if I can answer that, and I'm not sure, Tiffany, if you're familiar with that. When we first started discussing this project with Park Nicollet, they went through on their own independently, and I don't pretend to understand all the particulars, a very heavy vetting process with FEMA because it was originally submitted, and they've essentially walked away from their thinking that this flood wall would be an eligible submittal. The process alone, and I think some of the indication that they got from FEMA, because it's not a damage, it wouldn't come from the damages fund, it'd be from the flood resilience or protection next time fund, if you will. And so
that's the mitigation fund.
Right, the mitigation fund. And so my understanding from talks with Park Nicollet is they have undertaken to make a budget appropriation of their own for the flood wall. And then they're not relying on grant funding for this project. So that'd be a question I'd have to come back with more detail on and have a more specific conversation with them.
Anything else? Are we ready to vote on this resolution to enter into a cooperative agreement? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Mr. Wisker.
Thank you.
Item 13.1, Administrator's Report, Mr. Erdahl.
Thank you, President White and managers. I have just kind of a few updates for everyone's information. One is that I know for the cost share grant program, it underwent a pretty large revision in the program in terms of adding some rigor and some consistency to the evaluation process last year. And one of the things that's been changed based on feedback from the managers and also from the CAC is to kind of have some deadline dates rather than having just an ongoing rolling deadlines. So there are deadlines this year instead of having that just be a rolling process. The deadline for the non-homeowner grants was this past March 18th, and we received 8 applications for funding for that. 3 are from churches for site right retrofits, 3 from cities, cities of Edina, Mound, and Plymouth, for street reconstruction projects. 1 is from a school as a companion project to their Cynthia Creek grant, and 1 is for Metro Blooms for a neighborhood scale project in Minneapolis. So the applications are being reviewed by a staff working group, kind of an interdisciplinary team of staff. Then that will go on to the CAC committee, and then come to the Board of Managers for your review in April. The deadline for homeowner projects is June 17, and then there will be a second application deadline for non-homeowner projects in the fall in September. So the deadlines have been a great way to kind of focus that level of activity and make some of the staff efforts a little bit more predictable. The staff also recently applied through the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for a Green Corps member to develop a district-wide database for stormwater BMPs and use that to help us analyze inspection data. So that will be something that we'll kind of learn a little bit more about in mid-April to the end of June. We should know whether or not we were awarded a Green Corps member again this year. We had one 2 years ago, but then we're not successful in receiving that support this past year. Just a couple other little notes. Again, the Minnehaha Creek cleanup is coming up on the 24th of July, so some of the materials are out, some of the planning is going, and we're making some of that progress. So I assume that's all on all of your calendars, I hope. This past week we've been pretty busy with some staff onboarding in both the permitting with some new staff there, and also as district representatives in research and monitoring, and they'll be introducing themselves to you in upcoming meetings. And I think everyone's very encouraged with the group of new folks joining us. And then just lastly, I want to, on behalf of the district staff, I do want to thank Manager Jim Calkins for his years of service and leadership to the Watershed District. And also extend a warm welcome to Manager Bill Becker. We look forward to working with you, and we are looking forward to all the different things in the coming year and years ahead for that. And just as a little bit of a side note, but I will be out of town next week on our kids' spring break, so I won't be around next week.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.
Oh,
Yes.
I have one question.
The meeting is not adjourned.
I signed up for a MOD meet and greet, breakfast with your legislator. And Paul Thiessen is my representative, so I'm planning to spend some time with him. But I was wondering if anybody else had signed up for representing the district there.
I registered for the breakfast, but I haven't made any appointments.
I haven't finalized it. I haven't called in.
Yeah. Manager Bliss.
I will be there the night before for the, whatever it is.
Reception, maybe?
Yeah, the reception. Whatever it is.
Go to the reception and not the meeting, huh?
Yeah.
Well, there's a reception and a breakfast.
Sounds like my folder.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now the meeting's adjourned.